So our filter is now working, but we can actually select values where we have no data. And we might want to show an appropriate message in such cases. And that leads us to the second part of this module, conditional content, which is also important. Conditional content is about rendering different output under different conditions. So I'm not talking about lists, but about rendering either A or B or C, whatever you need. And that's something I want to do here. In expenses.js, we render our list of expense items. But if our filtered expenses array turns out to be empty, we render nothing. Now, we might wanna instead render a message telling the user that we have no items for the chosen filter. And for that, we wanna render content conditionally. How can we do that? Well, we can again add a dynamic expression here in our JSX code and simply use a condition here. I'm not talking about an if condition because long statements like this, the same is true for loops, are actually not allowed here between these curly braces, but we can use a ternary expression here. And we could check if our filtered expenses length is equal to 0, which means we have no items in that filtered expenses array. And if that's the case, after a question mark, which is the default JavaScript ternary expression syntax, we render a simple message in a paragraph where we say, no expenses found. Otherwise, after the colon, we render our list. So we grab this here, cut it, and remove this empty pair of curly braces now, and we render this mapping expression in the else case. And again, that's the default JavaScript ternary expression syntax. Condition, question mark, then what we want to do if the condition is met, colon, for the else case, what we want to do if it's not met. And if we save this, you see, I got no expenses found here for 2022, but for 2020, I do have my expense. Of course, that's a bit hard to read. We can fine-tune this in a second, but that's how we can render content conditionally. Of course, long ternary expressions like this can be a bit hard to read though. So we can also fine-tune this or restructure this and reuse this condition, but then abuse a little trick in JavaScript. We can add the AND operator and then use the content, the JSX content we want to render if this condition is met. JavaScript works such that if you use the AND operator, it basically will return the part after the AND operator as a result of this overall check here if the first condition is met. So if this first condition is met, it moves on to the part after the AND operator and it then returns that value. And that's what we're abusing here. And abusing sounds like a bad thing. This is actually something which is fine to use. You'll see it in a lot of React projects, and it simply allows you to write shorter expressions. Because now we can do the same here for our alternative. There we want to check if we got more than 0 items, and then we use and to output our list here. So now I basically split that long ternary expression into two standalone expressions which check different conditions, using this AND trick here, where the part after AND is rendered if the part before AND returns true. And with that, we got the same behavior as before, as you can tell. But even that might be too much logic in the JSX code, so we also got a totally alternative way of handling this. We can add a variable, maybe name it expenses content, but the name is up to you. And we assign a default value here. And the default value could be our message that no content was found. And we can store JSX content like this in variables. We can return it, and we can also use it anywhere else where we work with values. So we can store JSX content in variables, as I'm doing it here. This is absolutely fine. You are not limited to using JSX only if you return. You can also use it to create a value which is stored in a variable. Now, why am I doing that though? Because now we can add a if check here before we return, and we can check if filtered expenses length is greater than 0. So if we do have filtered expenses. And if that's the case, I want to override expenses content, so I will change the value of this variable, and I will set this then to the result of this map call here, like this. So this list of expense items, that's my value stored in expenses content if we got a length greater than 0. And then down there in our returned JSX code, we can get rid of all that logic, and we just add a simple dynamic expression where we point at expenses content, so at this variable. And this variable holds either this JSX code or this array of JSX elements. Both is renderable, and therefore both can be used here. And now we get a lean JSX snippet which we return, and we got our logic in the component function itself. And we could argue that this is more readable. And again, if we save that, it works just as before. And it's up to you which approach you prefer. It also depends on the length of the conditions and the content which is rendered under different cases. But ultimately, this is probably the cleanest way. But again, it is up to you what you prefer. I want to show you all options so that you can go with the way which you personally like the most. I will go with this approach because I'm a fan of having a lean JSX snippet here.